In this section, I want to go through the different options when you have the camera set in the movie mode for the shooting menu. And so, as I've mentioned several times before, there is a notable difference when you have the camera set up from stills to movies. And now we're switching it over to movies to explore the different and unique movie options here in the menu. Now, some of these are truly unique. You are not going to find them in the shooting menu, and that's what we'll be looking at very closely here. There's also a lot of items that are exactly the same as in the still menu, and that is so that you can have two separate settings depending on what mode the camera's in. And so there's a couple of different types of things that you're going to find in here. We're going to concentrate on things that are new, unique, and different to movie shooting. All right, first up is the movie recording size. Now, we talked about this back in the movie section, and this is where you get to select the resolution, frames per second, and compression style of the format that you are recording. And this is where we got to this big video grid, the ugly slide here, that shows you what happens when you select each of these different modes. Be mindful that this one on the far left is actually 6K, not 4K in here, and so that's the raw option. And so obviously there's a lot of trade-offs between which mode you are going to put your camera in, whether you want to shoot the maximum amount of resolution or you want to shoot smaller, more easy to work with file sizes. And so take a look at the movie section for more information on this slide and the features in here. Next up is high frame rate. So if you want to shoot something that's happening really quick and play it back slowly, well, that is what you can do here. You can do it at anywhere from 100 to 240 frames per second, and this will be played back at the normal playback rate for whatever NTSC or PAL system that you have set up. And so as you can see, this is a great opportunity for really slowing down something that's moving very, very quickly. Be advised, though, that you're not going to get any audio when you shoot this, so this is just for the video section. Now, in order to set this up, I do want to show you a little something in the menu. So let's go ahead and dive into the menu for a moment. So when you come down to the high frame rate option, you can dive into this and you can turn it on. Now, it already has kind of a default setting that it's going to. What you can do then is go back up to the movie recording size, and you can see that you can select different options here, but you'll notice in some modes, like the 4K mode, you can't select the 240 frames per second. In order to get to that, you have to go to the FHD, the full high definition. You can come down and then select either the 120 or the 240 frames per second. So not all frame rates are available with all recording formats, and that's just limitations on what the camera can handle and what it can and cannot do. So make your choices appropriately in there. All right, next up is movie record format. This one is really important and maybe should have been first on the list in my opinion. The standard mode for recording on this camera is in an MP4 format. So this is going to be with full HD and in the two different 4K options. If you want to shoot 6K, which is also called 4KD, but confusing, I know that, you're going to get the Canon RAW format file. And so if you want to get into the shoot RAW, this is that main switch that you turn this on and off at. And this is going to change the movie recording size feature that we talked about just a couple slides ago. That's going to change those options in there quite a bit. And so make sure you get this one set correct for what you want to do. Movie cropping. So if you want to, you can crop in with a 1.66 crop. And this is going to be very handy if you need a little bit more telephoto reach. And so this is going to have very little, it's going to have some impact on image quality, but very little impact on your overall image quality. It can be very handy for wildlife, birding, and certain types of video recording where you just don't have a long enough lens. Sound recording. Now, the camera does have a built-in microphone, and that's what this is generally controlling. And that microphone is terrible for recording video, but you can control it to maybe make it slightly less terrible. Yeah. All right, so sound recording, you can leave it in auto if you're wanting to just have the most basic audio recording possible. If you do want to have a little bit better level set, you probably want to monitor it with headphones, and you can set it manually and adjust it here if necessary. The record level would be set here if you need to adjust it or down depending on the ambient noise that you are hearing. If there is wind hitting the front of the camera or the microphone, that can cause a lot of interference and a horrible sound. And so if you are under windy conditions with the built-in microphone, you can turn it on. It makes it slightly less terrible. Kind of the same thing with the attenuator. This dampens loud noises. So say a firework display or something like that where there's loud booms and things, that could get clipped because it's too loud for the audio range. And so if that happens on a regular basis, you can turn this on in here. But once again, limited scope of help with the built-in microphone. On to page 2, exposure compensation. We've talked about this a fair bit. This just gives us another control of it when we are shooting movies. ISO speed controls, we've talked about this at length before, but this allows you to have separate set of ISO setups compared to your still photography. So we have pretty much the same range, not quite completely, but we still have a pretty wide range when it comes to the different speeds that we can set for the ISO here. The range is going to be the selectable range that we can get from top to bottom. We can also choose the maximum ISO when we are in auto ISO. So if you know you don't want to go above a certain number, you can get that set here. Now, if you want to shoot in HDR, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. This first way here is probably the better of the two if you have the right equipment to hook it up to. So if you do have an HDR TV, you are wanting to shoot video for that particular TV, this is where you can turn it on. And so this will give you the best quality picture with that HDR monitor. Now, before those type of monitors were widely available, Canon had their own HDR shooting, and they just kind of prepackaged it. This is for everybody so that they could get a little bit greater dynamic range in their final video. And I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but they just kind of changed the tone curve in the recording of their video. And so this is going to work, but it's a limited older version of HDR recording. Auto lightning optimizer. So we talked about this with still photography. This is where the camera will boost the shadows, hold the highlights back, and this can be real good for general video work. If you're shooting a lot of people, it can be good if you want to see a little bit more information in the shadows. If you want to have a streamlined post-production where you're not fussing with a lot of video editing controls, you can do this fix in camera. This is also something you can do very well in post-production, especially if you have good software to work with. And so I think a basic user might want to turn this on. Just it can kind of help out and give you a little bit more information in the shadows. But some of the more advanced users are going to be making those changes themselves in good software. Highlight tone priority. Once again, as we talked about in stills, what this does is it holds highlights back from getting overexposed. Yeah, we don't want our exposures to go too bright here, but generally I'm going to leave it turned off because of the way that the camera generally just underexposes everything and then brightens it, and it limits the ISOs that you can use, which means you might get more noise. It's a feature you may want to test to really see if you want to use or not. On to page 3, the anti-flickering option. This can be a bit of a different problem when you shoot video, and so you may encounter it in different areas than when you shoot stills. This is where you can turn it on. When shooting video, it is sometimes nice to have a little bit more fine control when it comes to the aperture. That tends to be a very precise way of controlling the exposure. In still photography, third stop seems to be as accurate as most people need it, and that's a good system. But if you want to be more accurate when you're shooting video, you can set it to 1/8 stops so that you can be even more precise. And this can help out, especially in multi-camera shoots where you really want to make sure that each camera is recording the same brightness levels. Auto slow shutter speed. So this is either a great feature or a terrible feature, depending on your skill level in shooting video and what you are trying to accomplish. For the simple mom and pop, just weekend person grabbing a little bit of video just because they want to shoot some basic video, this is great because what happens is when the light level gets low, the camera will use a slower shutter speed to maintain the proper exposure so that your video looks good. For the serious photographer, videographer, cinematographer, A constant shutter speed is a very important feature that they want in their video so that it has a consistent look to it. And that's why there might be a very different setting here depending on your level and what you are doing with your video. All right, on to page 4, white balance. This is the same concept as we talked about before in stills, but allows us to have 2 different settings, one for video, one for stills. And we're going to see a bunch of that in this section here. Same thing goes when custom setting your white balance or doing a white balance correction. Picture styles, a little bit more important here, I think, than in stills, but it depends on what sort of software you have for editing your stills or videos later on. One of the more advanced ways of controlling your picture style is through the Canon log settings. This is where it records the tonal range in a different curve. This is a curve rather than in a linear line, and it allows you to get a little bit more information in the shadow areas, hold back those highlights, and you can color grade later on. Now, for the basic user, probably going to leave this turned off if you don't do much video shooting. If you do want to do a lot of video shooting and you want to have a large amount of control over the grading of your image, you're going to want to turn this on, and that's going to lead you to some new options. And you can use Canon's Log 3, which is one of their more popular standards for this type of shooting. Once you are in here, you can turn on the assist. If you turn on log, it's going to be this very flat, uncontrast, low saturation image. Doesn't exactly look very good, and it's sometimes hard to work with when it comes to focusing. And so if you turn on view assist, it fixes it for you in the viewfinder, but it actually records that lower contrast log profile to the video that you're recording. You can also change the color characteristics if you want to adjust those colors ever so slightly in here. Most people probably won't need to do it, but if you need to, there is the option for making that tweak. The color space that you are using can also be adjusted depending on the color space that you're going to be using later on. Use a larger color space to have more places to work with when you are working with post-production software. Clarity. As we mentioned before, this is going to give you a little bit more edge detail. It's going to give you a little bit more contrast than sharpening. And so if you want to adjust the clarity of your images, there is a little bit of an edge that you can add onto it here. On to page 5. Lens aberrations. This is the same as in the photo menu, but it just allows you to have separate settings for both video and for stills. High ISO speed, you kind of have the same options here. If you like to fix this in post-production software, leave this turned off. If it's something that you don't mess with post-production, you just shoot simple little clips out of the camera, yeah, maybe leaving it on standard there. All right, time-lapse movie. Now this is very similar to a feature we talked about earlier called interval timer. In the interval timer mode, which was in the shooting mode, that allowed you to shoot a bunch of individual still photographs at a regular interval. The idea is that you would take those individual images and use an external software program to compile them into a finished movie. Gives you great flexibility with working with individual frames. You could delete a frame, you could do Photoshop work on individual frames, and gives you a lot more custom controls there. In this time-lapse movie mode, you don't get the individual images, but you do get a finished video. So if you know you just want to get a straight video out of it and you don't want to mess with all the individual images, well, this is where you can come and set everything up. So let's take a tour. First up, you can decide whether you want to use this feature or not here. Normally it's going to be disabled, obviously, but when you do want to enable it, this is the first thing to turn on. Next up is the interval. This is the distance and time from one frame to the next. Depends on what you're shooting. Could be 1 second, 10 seconds, a minute, or something else. You might need to do a little bit of experimenting to see what works well for what you're shooting. Next is the number of shots. Here I recommend 2 different numbers, either 300 or infinity, or a really big number. 300 shots is nice for typical things because you can get 10 seconds of video for 30 frames per second. Kind of a nice little short little clip. If you want to get as long as possible, well, you can set in as big a number as you want, at least as long as you want to hang around for the camera to shoot its movie. Next up is movie recording size. You can choose either the 4K or the full HD setting, set according to your needs, of course. Next up is auto exposure. Now, I usually like to shoot things, and I usually recommend shooting these time-lapse movies in a manual exposure, but if you do want to use an automated exposure mode, like aperture priority, shutter priority, or the program mode, this is where the camera will lock the exposure on the first frame. Now, which one is best is a little hard to say. It depends on your exposure situation. So once again, you may need to test this one out to see which works best for what you're doing. And then you have the screen auto off. And this is what I would normally recommend turning on. What this does is it turns the screen on the back of the camera off so that you're not wasting battery power. Generally, you're not going to need to monitor these things as you shoot every single shot. In those few circumstances where you might need to monitor things on a shot-by-shot basis, then you can turn it on and you will use a bit more battery power when you do that. Do you want the camera to beep each time the image is taken? Generally, I would say no, and so you can drag this down to the left and turn it off, but you could set it at different levels. In some cases, you might need to be getting that confirmation that the camera is still firing and still shooting. And so there are reasons why you might want to use this, but for a lot of situations, I would say generally turn it off. Finally, down at the bottom, you'll see your recording and playback time. So as you change the number of shots that you shoot and the interval, you'll see how long it's going to take to record and how long your finished video is going to be. Very helpful calculations so that you don't have to work those out in your head or externally. So handy feature to have. So that is your time-lapse movie, once again, where you are ending up with a completed movie as opposed to individual images that we saw back in the photo shooting menu. All right, movie self-timer. So if you do want to record video, but you want a timer to start either so that you can get in the shot yourself, like with a 10-second self-timer, or if maybe you're on a tripod and you don't want to bump the camera and have any sort of movement in the video, you can use a cable release. That would be one option, but if you just want to use the movie self-timer, that's another way of getting around that problem. If you want to use a remote control to start and stop your video recording, you can use the BRE1 wireless remote, and this connects up via Bluetooth, and that way you can start and stop without having to be directly at the camera. On to page 7, the image stabilizer mode has a little bit of a sub-menu we're going to dive into. First option is to turn this on and off. For many handheld things, I would recommend leaving it turned on. There is a movie digital IS, and now you should always be a little bit scared when you see digital because that means it is using pixels to try to solve the problem here. And so what it does is it crops in on the frame a little bit, just a 1.1 times crop, and it stabilizes it. If you are doing a handheld shot and you are trying to stabilize it as much as possible, this may affect your image quality, but it also may give you a smoother shot. So there is a bit of a balance that you're going to have to play off to see if it's worth it. But as I say, if you're doing a walk and talk and you're moving the camera around a lot and you do want to stabilize it as much as possible, adding this onto your standard stabilization will give you the most stable shot that you can out of the camera. Customize the quick controls. We talked about this in the last section, so you can go through and you can customize which modes you have access to. And if you shoot a lot of video and you make a lot of quick changes, highly recommend you go in here and adjust it for whatever it is that you do and want to make changes in very quickly when you're shooting. The shutter button has some special functions that you can customize, so let's dive into that sub-menu. When you press halfway down, do you want it to do one-shot focusing or servo focusing or metering only? Depends on how you work with the camera. Depends if you prefer to do back button focusing or use the shutter release for it. For most video shooting, a lot of people like having that servo focus so it can focus on subjects as they move around in the frame. When you press all the way down, do you want that to start and stop the movie recording or not do anything? There is a dedicated movie start and stop button on the back of the camera, so you don't need it. Some people like it. It might be because the camera is in a cage or mounted in a position that it's hard to get to. You can have a second button, start and stop your recordings. How quickly the metering times out, 8 seconds is usually fine. Adjust as necessary. The zebra settings are for controlling the exposure. If you are setting too bright of exposure, the zebras will show you where your pixels are being clipped because they are too bright. So there's a number of settings that you can turn on and off and control in here. First up is turning them on and off. Normally, you're probably going to leave it turned off. It's a little distracting looking at them on a regular basis, but for those of you who want to really be sure that you're not clipping the highlights, then you would turn these on. You can choose which pattern. There's a Zebra 1 and Zebra 2 pattern, and then you can combine them and have them both show up at the same time. And both of these are customizable, so you get to set exactly where they are. So they're not the settings that I'm really giving you here. It's just that you can choose where they are. You can choose a mid-range setting. You can choose a highlight setting. You can have them show up together. There's a lot of different ways that you can use this so that you can see right when you're shooting if you are overexposing. Shooting info display is very much like we have in the photo shooting menu, something you want to go in and customize. Viewfinder display format, as in stills, you can have different size frames in the viewfinder in case you are using with glasses or goggles. Auto power off temperature. All right, so Canon decided that the camera should only get so hot before it stops recording and it's gotten too hot. Now that standard setting is a pretty good setting to keep if you are going to be hand holding the camera. If you set it to the high standard, the camera will record as long as possible, but the camera, the battery, the memory card, other things may get hotter than is comfortable to you or me. And so be aware that if you do set that high setting, you will get the maximum amount of recording time, but something else may be uncomfortable and you may need to take some precautions. You're not likely to get hurt. It might surprise you and may feel just a little hot to the touch. Standby low resolution. So one of the ways that you can save battery power when you are shooting video is that by having the camera go into a low res standby mode, it's going to use less battery power, give you lower resolution in the viewfinder, but that is when you are not recording, when you are in the standby mode. And this is going to help prevent overheating. And so this feature, by the way, was formerly called overheat control. HDMI display. So if you're going to be hooking the camera up to an external monitor, you can choose where the information is seen. And so it depends on how you are using that monitor. Are you using it to record information, or do you just want to look at information on the screen so that you can set menus and so forth? Time code. This goes into a whole submenu here. This first one is deciding whether it's going to be something that is advancing during your recording or is it advancing all the time in the free run. And so generally more amateur videographers would just choose record run, which tells you how long that particular clip is. There are certain instances in professional shooting where you're shooting with multi-cameras and you want to have free run where they're all running the whole time, and it's going to be easier to hook up and synchronize multiple cameras shooting. Starting time setting, so the time that is being recorded, how do you want to have that set? So you can go in and manually set a particular time if you want. You can have it reset to 0 if you want, or you can set it to the camera time that's already in the camera right now. The movie record count is going to show you what is showing up when you are recording the movie, whether it's the time or the time code. And then movie play count is going to show you when you play back, which one are you going to see. HDMI is going to be a submenu into what happens when you plug in via the HDMI port on the side of the camera. Do you want to turn the time code on to send that signal out to your external monitor or recorder? If it's just a monitor, you probably don't need it. If it's a recorder, you probably do want it. Record command, what that will do is that will take the recording button on the camera and that will trigger the recording device that you are attached to start recording. That can be handy so that you don't have to press a separate button on another device to start recording. Some people may not like it, so that's why there's an option in there. The drop frame corrects for a time discrepancy by skipping time code numbers. Most people are going to want to leave that turned on. All right, there you go, folks. That is your movie shooting menu, and now you're ready to go out and start shooting your next movie.